Thanks everyone for joining. My name is Sean Cordner. I'm the host of the webinar today. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Amplix. Um, we are talking today about AI in practice, lessons from 2025 and a roadmap for 2026. So we did a couple of pieces of content in early 2025 around what's going to happen in 2025 with AI and what are going to be the trends. So for this webinar today, we just want to see how we did about predicting some of those trends, see what happened in 2025 and what we have to look forward to in 2026. Joining me today are three experts. I'm going to have them introduce themselves, starting with Scott.
Hi, I'm Scott Weiner, AI lead at NeuEon. We do strategic um, consulting around technology, and I focus primarily these days on helping companies with their AI strategy.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. And Robbie?
Thank you, guys, and thank you, Sean, for having me and RapidScale. So, guys, I'm Robbie Gulry. I am the channel CTO for a company called RapidScale, and I focus these days on really three areas of where most CIOs are concerned with: multi-cloud, a lot of conversations and thought leadership around cyber resilience, and then, of course, a lot of conversations and, frankly, a lot of confusion around data and AI. And again, looking forward to being here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Robbie. And Mac?
Hey, good day, everybody. Matt Green here. I'm SVP of Digital Transformation at IntelePeer, and we are focused on helping folks across a number of different industries to leverage AI for real-time voice communications with their patients, members, constituents, customers, and making their lives easier.
Great. Thanks, Mac. Appreciate that. So, Scott, I'm going to start off with you. What are some of the top trends and advancements that we've seen in the evolution of AI technology in 2025?
So there's a lot, and I think the main ones fall into, on the technical side, the agentic AI, the idea that we kind of move from the chat bots to AI that actually can take action on our behalf. Multimodal models was another big one. The idea that the models can now handle lots of different types of input, so text, images, video, audio, so on, all together. That's changing the kind of problems we can throw it at. Reasoning capabilities have become very, very important in 2025. The ability for these models to think about things longer and deeper and get better answers. And we've seen efficiency gains at the inference level. The costs have and latency of these models has dropped tremendously, and that's probably what's created the massive investment into AI that's happened in 2025 as well. The only other thing I'd say about it is that we also hit a reality check, which I think we'll talk about more later. But the idea that the infrastructure is really important, and so all these pilots happened in 2025, and people started investigating AI, but they hit a snag, and one of them was that they weren't really ready for it, and so that's what they discovered. And so we'll talk more about where that's going, but that was also another big insight from 2025.
Awesome. And maybe you've got a unique perspective. You're someone that frequently addresses Congress on matters of AI, and a lot has changed over the past year in terms of policy. So maybe just kind of give us an update of, where our government sits in terms of AI policy and what does the outlook look like?
So, well, I talk more to congressional staff than Congress directly, but what I try to do is help them understand where AI is and get their feedback on what's important. What we found is that right now we have a very frictional AI strategy in our government in the U.S. specifically. The states are all coming out with their own rules and regulations, which is making business more difficult because you have 50 different sets of rules to watch. But the federal government is kind of going the other way. And in fact, there's an executive order that came out in the last few weeks that basically says, hey, states, you need to stop making AI rules. There needs to be a federal guideline. I love the idea of that. The problem is there isn't a federal guideline. So right now, there aren't a lot of guardrails around it, and we're really dependent on companies to do the right thing at the moment, which is, concerning. The flip side is if you look at other countries, well, the EU AI Act is probably the biggest one. They're putting a lot of restrictions on what AI safety means. And so I think what happens is a lot of companies are starting to use that as their kind of their post of what they need to achieve in terms of what the regulation needs to look like in the meantime while we're figuring it out still.
I'm just curious, what does that mean to businesses? Does that mean they should be conservative in how they're making investments because there's going to be policy in the future that could potentially impact what they've already done?
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I think that also a lot of it's common sense. If you're just trying to be an ethical, principled company, you're going to focus on transparency. You're going to want to look at observability, like how do I know what's going on in my systems? Explainability, why did it do what it did? These are things you're probably going to want to do anyway. So I think using the EU AI Act as a kind of a suggestion, but then also look at some of the states, what they're doing in California, in Colorado, and other states that are kind of coming out with their laws. They all kind of look similar in terms of what they're trying to get at. Basically, what it comes down to is figuring out where the accountability is when things go wrong. And I tend to go with the idea, I tend to see the idea of, who has control that's probably where the accountability should go. So who could make the change? So for instance, there's things the model does that you're using and you can't change, but then there are things you can do on top of that model. So for instance, if you add your own company data to a model and someone comes to your website and types in a query like, how much is this going to cost me? And it gives the wrong information. Well, you're responsible for that, not the model maker, right? So that's kind of where I think we're at in terms of the liability conversation. But yes, I think there's some level of conservation, conservativeness that you need to have. Also, what companies are lacking right now is enough governance around and we'll talk more about this, around their AI, um, how they're thinking about their responsibility in this process. So I would liken it to we are all getting in cars and driving very fast, and we forgot to put in the seatbelts. That's what we need to do now.
Seatbelts are important. So in the marketing department here, one of the things that I'm responsible for is privacy policy and making sure that we're able to kind of execute on our privacy policy. And there's really not much federal guidance on privacy in the United States. There is the CCPA, California Consumer Protection Act.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that is a guideline along with GDPR, which are the European standards that are really the most consumer friendly regulations when it comes to privacy. And so we maintain that standard. Would you recommend a similar approach to businesses out there that, for in a vacuum of regulations, that if they follow something that's a state put out, for example, or that Europe is using, would that keep them safe?
I think a fair way to put it is that at this point, the least common denominator will be probably the most restrictive rules out there. So kind of find the state that's kind of being the most restrictive. If you're meeting their rules, you're probably meeting everyone's rules. It's kind of the way I look at it right now. On the other hand, if you're really not doing business in that state at all and don't intend to, then you may have a different perspective.
Right. And then you mentioned inference costs going down. I just wonder what's the practical implication of that? What's driving that, number one, and then what's the implication to businesses?
Yeah, the costs have gone down. Like I think I saw one report recently, like 300 times or something in the last few years. It's incredibly cheap now to process the information. We're just getting we got it's a combination of things. It's hardware, it's the model are getting more performant. Also, we're getting better at context engineering, which is the way we're building our prompting. We're getting more efficient with our token use. There's lots of different reasons why it's getting cheaper. Um, the way we're training the models and so on. Also, we're taking advantage of smaller models sometimes. That's also helping. These multimodal models are adding to the benefit. There's lots of reasons. But the bottom line is that as it's getting less expensive to use AI systems, we're using them more. So the usage is going up far faster than the inference costs are coming down. So even though there's a dramatic drop in price of using AI than there was just a few years ago, the cost may not be high, but the usage has gone through the roof. In fact, it's so high that now companies are starting to do 24/7 AI. They've got agents running around the clock. And so it's becoming more like a utility rather than a one-time fee. And so we're having to think about the whole model of the model differently now.
Yeah. What's driving the increased usage? Is it partially adoption? Are you seeing more enterprises finally, deploying AI and really starting to leverage it in real world use cases?
It's kind of all of the above. So what's happening is as the price goes down, it's getting less expensive to experiment with. So pilots have gone through the roof in 2025. So everyone's piloting. I mean, there's very few companies that aren't running some kind of AI pilots. Some of those pilots are translating into real world benefits, and we'll talk a little bit more about who's seeing benefits and who isn't. But the reality is that as you start to experiment with it, you're gonna have more use. And the thing is, there are companies that are saying, "Hey, everyone, just start using AI." So there's some of that. Like they're just using it because they were told to use it. They would invest in some technology that has AI in it, and so now they're using AI. That's really not the brunt of it. The brunt of it is as we get into this agentic technology, the idea of agents that can go out and do things on our behalf, these things are eating a lot of tokens and they're doing a lot of work. They're thinking for themselves. And so these high reasoning models are taking up more, burning more. And then these agents that can run for longer and longer periods of time. And we're going to see this growing. We're looking at the next few years, you're going to see a lot of like 10 million token models coming out. There's already, this is already what's happening. Well, context windows. And so as this starts to happen, you're talking about longer and longer times these things can run without hallucination, without going off track. And so they're going to run longer and longer and longer. And so that's going to continue that trend of more use.
So as that trend continues, then would you say that it's important for businesses to put controls in place over the agentic AI activity to ensure that they're not just overnight just going to town and driving costs up unexpectedly and out of budget?
Absolutely. They're essentially, I have these five pillars that I kind of follow that this is the way to look at it, I think. So if you think about I'm just trying to remember where I want to start. So if you think of it this way, the things you have to get right, and this is actually there was a Deloitte study that just came out recently, a paper they wrote. I forget the name of it now. I'll try to find it and we can put it in the notes. But um, basically, what they find is that there are the first thing you have to think about is orchestration. Orchestration is the idea that now you have these agents that need to collaborate and talk to each other. That has to get right. The second piece that people are not getting right now on mass, like the majority are not yet, is measurement. They're running way too fast from pilot to execution or with this orchestration, and they're forgetting about measurement. And measurement is what you just talked about. It's one thing to have observability, which is are the lights on? Is the agent running? Is it doing its job? It's another thing to say, is it doing it well? Is it hallucinating? Is it giving the right answers? Is it optimal? That's the measurement piece. And then there's this in the economics of running these things 24/7 and all that, the inference economics. Then you have data quality. And this is somewhere where I think it's like somewhere between 37 and 47%. I forget the exact number. I can find that too, of companies that are complaining that data quality is preventing them from really taking these things from pilot to live. So it's one of the reasons why we find financial services is kind of excelling at this compared to other sectors, is they tend to have cleaner data to begin with. And then the last one, which is huge, is talent. Having the right people with the right skill sets. One of the things we're running into is something called the critical skills gap. What's happening is that as AI is slowly starting to take over the entry level roles and being able to do more of the entry level tasks, there's really nowhere for the entry level people to go except up beyond that to orchestrate those things. And as they start to go to those kind of higher level skill sets, which is in some ways great, they're not getting the experience in the critical thinking that they would get as at the entry level. And so we're hearing a lot of complaints from companies saying, I can't find people that have really good critical thinking skills. And that's becoming the primary skill you need to really effectively work with these agents. You need to know how to help them create the right guardrails to do the job you need them to do.
So AI has dumbed us all down that quickly that there's not enough people with critical thinking skills to
This is
fill the job.
trending. This is a trending issue. This is a trending issue, but there have been recent studies that have come out that have shown, I think there was one from MIT recently that talked about this, where they're finding that the cognitive load is going down, that as we use AI in a very non-critical way, like write this email for me, review this book, summarize this meeting, what we're getting out of that is we're doing less mental work. And as that's happening, our ability to think is literally changing. It's literally changing the way we think in our brains. So what we have to do is start to make sure that we're using AI as a challenge to us, as a collaborator with us, as a coworker, not as a replacement. And that's something that we're all going to have to learn.
Okay, Mac, it seems like my big takeaway from that is that we're all getting dumber. Maybe you've got some better news for us. Um, what are some of the top trends and
Ouch.
advancements that that you've seen in the contact center space specifically in terms of use cases and adoption for AI in 2025?
Sure. I wouldn't use the phrase we're getting dumber. I think we are maybe overwhelmed with the potential of opportunities that AI is exposing right now. And some of our former approaches really should be thrown out the window. Scott, just to double click on some of the things that he said, he talked about pilots and prototyping and other things, is people have gone into this with this experiment mindset, right? Let's try it, let's poke at it, let's see what it does, versus the reality of a practical business implementation. I've got a problem. What are my solution candidates? Which solution candidate is going to get me to the best yield, both from a time and cost perspective, and can we work things through? Um, and we're finding when clients are able to make that mental leap, to maybe borrow that phrase, then AI becomes a very, very powerful and useful tool that makes things move a lot faster. I do think we've seen some real practical examples throughout the industry, both in, I'll call it, enterprise search capabilities and organizing both structured and unstructured data. We've also seen a lot of positiveness come out of, I'll call it, the internal development shops. Can I use AI to write better code or help me in my QA process as I go through a standard software development lifecycle? Where IntelePeer has been focused is really in a different space, which is, can AI help facilitate the mundane and transactional type of client interactions? So to borrow what Scott said, we can take our staff and move them up into more critical skills. So take a basic tier one call center person and turn them into an ambassador, and they can work different or more challenging process problems because AI's taken away the reset my password or move my appointment or tell me where my package is types of things. Our biggest lesson as we looked at those mundane things is that we and our clients probably went about it the wrong way. And I don't know that agentic appeared on the scene fast enough. So we started to use AI to replace workflows. So there's a defined steps that we have to go through. We got to go from A to F to do this thing. And so let's use AI because it can dynamically respond. It can deal when a human says, instead of saying yes or no to the question, they answer a question with a question, and AI can sort of move its way through that. But we still had a workflow mentality, and we ended up replacing the integrated voice response unit and not replacing the call center agent. And so, what agentic, which is very much an overused term out there, is allowing us to do is to say, wait a minute, no, let's go build an agent that has a goal. And let's go give that agent some boundaries. You can talk a little bit about compliance and some other things, but use that goal and those boundaries to get us to success, and then uh, attach a value to success so that we know when we do this, this project's creating value. Hey, we redirected, 10,000 package status questions to AI, and we didn't have to have a human do that. And a human typically can do 1,000 of those a month. And so we created 10 FTEs worth of value for this organization. And if we know those things going in, then all of a sudden it becomes very, very easy to go build upon it and drive further use cases. Um, the last piece, which hasn't calmed down, but I do think we've gotten more refined and we are smarter. And Scott talked about it, which is the compliance piece and that least common denominator. Like we know California and Illinois want anybody that's using AI in their state to announce that it is AI, so that nobody feels that we're deep faking a human. Almost every state, regardless if it's single party or two party consent, probably should have a disclaimer at the beginning of the call that they're being recorded for quality and training purposes. Because even though we may not be listening to that recording, we're probably taking that transcript and itemizing it and looking at some supervised fine tuning and other elements to take anonymized information back into the model and framework to make it better. And then last but not least, that compliance piece beyond just CCPA or GDPR are the things like PCI in the credit card or financial services realm and HIPAA in the medical realm that play an important role around compliance and really taking an approach of, yes, access to the data is important, but let's do it in a need to know basis. So I just need a true or false if this person's a patient. I don't need to know what type of patient they are, what they come in for a treatment. So I only need to let AI know that this person's already registered. Go ahead and schedule them to come into the clinic, not everything that I have to think about a whole nother protection suite around insofar as privacy or personal information being shared. So a lot of good lessons. And for us in our space, and I think across the industry, there actually has been a lot of successes, but I think it is human nature to talk about the failures a little bit more. Maybe they're getting a bit more press than a lot of the good things that are happening out there.
Yeah, well, the bad things get the clicks, right? And
Yeah, yeah. No, fair enough for sure.
bad incentive system. I wonder, this might seem like a weird question and oddly specific, but you mentioned the whole, you're being recorded and it may be used for training purposes. I do wonder if at some point we're going to need to disclose that it may be used for AI training purposes as well.
Yes.
Well, I do think at a federal level, and Scott may be more of an expert this than me, that I think that we've seen in other industries and other big transformations taking a more of an unregulated approach and letting the commercial elements figure out what to go do and what works best is the better approach versus what will happen is there will be a quilt work of regulations and rules. And the net of it, as we as an American based company, think about is other global players will then move ahead. So, do we have to think about that? Sure. Should we be cognizant of it? Yeah, but let's not react in fear. Let's work within the frameworks that are there now and drive forward to solutions with an eye to caution. In the same way that you would train a human, not to take, credit card numbers home or not to take a folder home with somebody's medical records in it. We have to take those same approaches to AI and how they log things, how things are saved, and how we anonymize or mask interactions so that those higher level functions can operate without concerns of betraying somebody's privacy or releasing sensitive information.
Yeah. For an organization to leverage agentic AI in the way that you're describing, it sounds like they not only need to focus on data, and I know Robbie can't wait to talk about data, so we'll
Sure.
give him that chance in a second. But what about the integrations necessary for an agent to actually accomplish an outcome?
Well, I think first the client needs to make a decision about where they are on the build versus buy continuum. Because there are different answers that come about. In the build realm, everything's behind the firewall, and you can think about it differently. You can point to certain elements, and perhaps more often than not, there's a human in the loop. So you stood up a knowledge base, and it gets to patient records, but there's a human that can get to stuff faster, but they're now manifesting the conversation versus in a buy scenario, you're having a service provider, like IntelePeer or many other choices that are out there that have to get access to that data, manipulate the conversation. And I don't say manipulate in a negative sense, but you've got to navigate it, right? And work through multiple steps of fetching data, posting updates into the back office to facilitate transactions and confirming it with that end user. So that readiness to be able to do that and do so, at least in our cases, in real time. It's a voice conversation. You can't say, but give me a moment to look up the record. But so many times during a conversation before user fatigue will set in, and even though it may not be true, you'll tolerate a human doing that and work through it. We have a lot of conversations or have had with our clients like, wow, that's slow. It took 3 or 4 seconds to respond. And what we do is we just simply play a human interaction. And it takes 10 to 12 seconds to respond, but nobody thinks that way because they're used to press one for sales, two for support, and three for billing,
Mhm.
and another prompt comes right away. And we do have to allow AI a moment to think, have the guardrails, make sure that they're enforced, and the response to come back. But to get back to your question, data readiness is key, not just in simply access to the information, but the organization of the information. Humans can discern duplicates very easily because they'll figure something out, but most clients haven't thought about, well, wait a minute, AI needs to have that same knowledge and work through, which record to pick to update and do this, that, and the other. And so not only is it data readiness, it's data cleanliness and working through those things. And then perhaps even stand up an AI project to work those things through and do it in parallel because the corner cases is what gets the click. But you can say, hey, wait a minute, duplicate records only stop 3 interactions out of 100 from being automated. So we transferred those 3 to a human. It's
Mhm.
okay.
Right.
Right. But we don't almost always never able to frame the problem statement in that manner. It just shows up as, oh, well, we got duplicate records. Let's put the project on hold until we clean the data.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're applying a different set of expectations to the
Yep.
technology than we
Yep.
are to humans. Robbie, we've heard from Scott, what happened in 2025 from an AI technology perspective, kind of the big picture. We've heard from Mac a little bit about what's happened in the CX and contact center space. Um, you've got a position where you're in front of CIOs all the time having strategic conversations, and a lot of them are about data and a lot of them are about AI. So, what can you tell us about how has the needle moved in 2025 for the technology leaders in terms of how they're leveraging AI and where they're at in the adoption cycle?
Yeah, I'm going to double down on a lot of what Scott and Mac said. Man, and you're right, Sean. I spent a lot of time with CIOs all over the country, different industries, different sizes of business. I think I'll go back to the Wayback Machine. You go back 12 months, there were probably 50, and I'm generalizing across all the conversations that I've had, probably 50 different AI pilots going on at any given time in a large organization. Marketing had some, sales had another with almost zero ROI. I think we've turned a little bit of a corner in 2025. There's probably 100 pilots going on, but I think there's a little bit more clear expectation and a little bit more clear sort of definition on what potentially success could look like. First of all, I asked a question, and I was in front of about 18 CIOs in a dinner in Dallas not that long ago, and I asked a very unanswerable question: Is AI IT? And I didn't expect a right answer or a wrong answer, but what I did get was about an hour's worth of argument and engagement from that conversation. So I think one of the things we saw is finally the IT leaders started saying no softly to board level pressure on chasing, let's just call them shiny objects, right? So instead of just going and saying yes to an AI project, they were thinking really first about the data strategy. So we started to see that a little bit more, that data is everything. You're right. I definitely want to talk about data. I think they realized in general that you're trying to build a big skyscraper on top of a swamp is probably not a good idea. So let's spend some time thinking about cleaning, enriching, enabling the data foundation layer. So we started seeing a little bit of that. Again, we're not in the end zone yet, but we're continuing to get closer and closer there in 2025. I think also, as we're basically thinking about a data strategy, a lot of organizations are like, wow, this is my data, this is my IP. Privacy is everything. I think more and more organizations started to embrace a little bit of data sovereignty. That kind of started first with these shadow AI tools. Hey, can I use tools like Liminal? And there's a few other companies out there that are basically saying, look, if your employees are going to use these publicly available LLMs, then we probably need to be much more, sort of particular on how they use them. Let's build these shadow AI tools in place as proxies to get to that. So we started seeing a lot more of that in 2025. Also, we started seeing in that realm of data sovereignty kind of potentially the move away from traditional public cloud environments into, let's just call them private vaults, where AI models run on their own secure infrastructure. I spent some time at Broadcom VMware Explored this year, and the talk of the town the whole week was basically private AI. So I think a lot of organizations are starting to think through what that could look like in 2026. But we started seeing the beginnings of that. And I think Scott alluded to this a lot. Instead of building general purpose chatbots or general purpose tools in general, now these agentic capabilities are like thinking about hiring, a specialist. So instead of just thinking about, a task that needs to be completed, let me actually build an agent that has actual agency to be able to activate and do some things that otherwise, these agents couldn't do. And I think the last thing I'll say in terms of enterprise, every organization, every vertical is different. Started to see a lot more models that were less general purpose and more specific to a vertical. So they're pre-trained on in healthcare, I don't know, medical coding or oncology and financial services. Maybe they're trained on, PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley. And as a result of that, you started to see, a lot more impactful results and potentially measurable ROI. I could probably go on 3 hours, but I think in general, this is probably, kind of the crux of it.
So over the last 2 years that I've been with Amplix, the first conversations that I was having with our clients when I first got here, they were around getting ready for AI, right? So someone mentioned it. The board said we need AI. What does that mean? Doesn't We don't know. Just go get AI, right? So is our data ready? Do we have a strategy? Do we have policy and governance in place? How do we deal with transparency and reportability and all these issues, right? These were conversations that we were having in theory. And then over time, it seemed like those conversations started to shift more towards adoption and pilots, but a lot of that was the buy model versus the build model. So I wonder, are you starting to see more build than buy?
I am starting to see more build and buy in general. We're starting to see conversations first about data, for sure, data strategy, data enrichment, data enablement, collection of data across a multitude of systems. Can we access our CRM data along with our ERP data to be able to, make sense of it in some way? So that's the start of a good build strategy. And then it's like, okay, we've got all these capabilities available on public cloud platforms, these microservices that are available on AWS as an example. Can we leverage them to create something that's uniform and unified and unique to my particular organization and my particular vertical? So we're starting to see a lot more of these build conversations because I don't know if Matt or Scott would agree. Off-the-shelf tools serve a certain purpose, but often, they're just not enough to accommodate the use cases. And that, speaking of use cases, a lot more discussion in 2025 about business outcomes. Let's actually define our scope. Let's figure out what it is that we want to accomplish. Let's really look at, instead of looking at it as a chatbot, let's look at it as a digital, work enabler to actually get work done. And so when you start thinking about it in that lens, you're really starting to, sort of lean in towards the build side of the house.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a couple of larger issues at play here. I mean, one of the things to consider is that we recognize, for instance, human in the loop is important, right? The idea that we don't give away all of the control and autonomy to the AI at this point. One of the problems we're seeing with that, though, is something called the human in the loop fallacy, which is that we're starting to trust the AI too much. And when you buy an AI solution, it's even worse because a lot of it gets buried behind that wall of product. And so when you build it, you have a little bit more control over the observability and transparency of what you're seeing. But the reality is, like, I'll give you one example. They did test with radiologists, and they found that radiologists tend to diagnose the radiology exams about 80% accuracy. But then they give the AI that has hallucinations, things like that. It drops to like under 20% accuracy, the human, once they start trusting the AI.
Mhm.
So, and this is for entry level radiologists. But that's kind of part of the problem is that we're starting to have these systems that are black boxes that we trust. That's not going to be good either. We need to have more transparency. The other problem with the side of it, even though, look, there's going to be a ton of buying going on, is the people that are buying solutions tend to be thinking about their current workflows and their current way of working and how can I install AI into my solution? How can I make it faster, better, and all that? The companies that are really starting to take advantage of AI and get massive, like multi-order benefits from AI are reorganizing and restructuring their entire company process. They're coming up with new ways of working. They're changing the whole way that they flow information through their systems. I mean, think about it. You now have I'll call it an employee that works 24/7. You're just going to work differently. And so you have to start dealing with that. In fact, one of the new terms you're going to hear in 2026, I think, is HR for AI.
Mm.
And what that's going to look like is there are certain aspects of HR that don't apply, of course, like reward systems probably are different than they are for AI. But you are going to need to have onboarding, as an example, something that you're going to need for AI, and so on. So you can go down the list, but you're going to start to see that the way we work and the way we process information and the way we just operate our companies is going to change for the companies that are super successful.
That
And everyone else is just
radiology,
going to use it.
that radiology study that you're referencing, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what was interesting about the results there was that um, humans are good, AI is the best, but humans plus AI is the worst. Is that correct?
Yeah, they kind of came up with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it's it's kind of an unfair statement, but there's obviously some truth behind it. The bottom line is we start trusting it, and if it's right 90% of the time, we're going to trust it. But it's not right 100% of the time. And when it's wrong, it can be really wrong. And so if you're not paying attention, you can drive off a cliff.
Yeah,
So
but also one of the problems is that when it is right, we sometimes think it's wrong because we're humans and we have
because we're
egos
humans,
and
yeah,
we're just as fallible, if not more fallible than the AI, right? So you
absolutely
could
true.
have the right decision, but you override that decision.
And we have the compounding problem is it's reducing cognitive load. So we're starting
Right.
to just kind of not think as much when we're
Right.
doing these things because we just see the answer and go, oh, okay.
Back to
So
us getting dumber.
We,
Um,
Yeah.
we've been, I just want to add to this, and so we've been internally talking about throwing around this term called productive failure,
mm,
right? Like Sean, you said it absolutely right. We're human. If I ask you or you ask me to do something, and then let's just say it's a failure, and I'm doing my performance end of year performance review with you, you may point that out, and it's going to hurt my feelings. It's going to hurt my potential compensation. Who knows, right? That's not the case with AI. There is no emotion, there is no feeling, there is no human element, and so you can. I think Scott said it perfectly. You work in a very different way when you know there's no ego behind the scenes. You're just literally, it's like the rigor and the roteness of it gives you an opportunity to really scale in a much more faster pace.
Yeah,
yeah.
and there are also techniques that we've been able to borrow from other industries where we naturally want to use concept of passes and fails. The reality of it is, if let's say we were, you worked at Target and you were ordering a million t-shirts from China, you're not going to go try on a million t-shirts and see if they're all the right size and have the right logo. You're going to go grab a sample, you're going to test them, and you're going to have a rubric to test and figure out, is this a critical, a major, or a minor defect, or is working as designed but could be better. Um, and if you have that mindset, you can actually use AI to police how well AI is doing, and not just in this, purely pass or fail method, but do a true quality management pass and look at where should humans be in the loop, what are the things they should focus on, and then use that feedback on the things that are at either end of that normal distribution, the stuff that worked really, really well and the stuff that went really, really bad, but bring it back to get your standard deviation from your mean a lot tighter. And so there are definitely a lot of tools. And I think, as the audience looks at, recommending things to their clients, that build versus buy continuum is important, regardless of the approach. Having a QM strategy and having it not be binary, not pass or fail, but look at, overall quality controls and what those mean and what the impact to success is important. Again, if calls are transferring because of duplicate records, but it happens 3 out of 100 times, that is a quality problem, but the system is working as designed. It transferred those patients to the front desk, they got dealt with. What we don't want to do is, some other the bad things, and we can, again, develop solutions to police that and bolster our confidence because the trail of breadcrumbs is there. There's a transcript, there's a recording, and there's this QM agent that inspects every call, not just the sample.
Sure.
I was going to
Um,
say this
Go
for,
ahead.
I was going to wait till the end and we talked about predictions for 2026, but I think we're on this topic. What I envision is more and more, let's focus on the boring, right? AI last year in 2024 was all about sexy projects, right? New innovative ways to look at things. But man, if we focus it on the boring, the rote and the capability or the processes that are absolutely, the most impactful, yet probably nobody wants to take on. That's where you start seeing success and you start seeing momentum to basically get you into, more interesting projects.
Yeah, you hear a lot about data, and that has been an excuse in some cases that people aren't entering into the AI adoption cycle yet because they think their data is not ready. And what I've been hearing from a lot of the experts that we talked to throughout the year is your data doesn't need to be as ready as you think. And I think, Robbie, you might have even told me this in a separate conversation, but unstructured data is just fine, and you maybe need to put a little less emphasis on data. But something that I don't hear people talk as much about that all of you have mentioned is process, and not just interjecting AI into existing processes, but maybe backing up and rethinking, getting back to the fundamentals and reimagining what a process could look like with the aid of a tool like AI, as opposed to just replacing a piece of the human, workflow.
Just to put this in perspective, so in that Deloitte Tech Trends report I was referring to before, they found that about 48% of the respondents were found that searchability of data was a big challenge. About the same amount found that reusability of the data was a big challenge, but 70% found modernizing their core infrastructure was the biggest challenge.
Hmm.
So this is the thing I think you're going to see in 2026 and beyond is a lot of legacy system modernization going on. Because what we're discovering is these systems were never built for agentic technology. And so that's a huge problem. And the flip side of that is on the governance of all of this people have been trying to apply traditional governance like cybersecurity and other types of risk management governance on top of it. And the problem is these are probabilistic systems, and we're trying to apply deterministic ways of dealing with governance that are very
Hmm.
static, like checkpoints and so on. These things are going to make decisions on their own. They're going to talk to each other, not to humans. And while we can track it, we can report on it, we can try to have alerts go off and all of that we have to think about governance in a new way. We just have to because it's going to keep changing and evolving way faster than our systems change. Like think about it. Any organization you're in right now, think about are you using NIST, for example, as a framework, as a security, right? Um, Whatever you have in place, how long did it take you to install that and get everyone trained on it and set it up? Now, tomorrow, some new AI strategy comes out and you have to adjust to it. Are you as an organization resilient enough? Do you have the 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 processes in place and the training in place and everything else and the tools to deal with that agility, that business agility that's going to be necessary? It is ironic. Several years ago, Agile was the biggest thing around, like 10 years, 15 years ago. It was like everywhere. And then that kind of, became part of other things in the operation. I think Agile is the biggest thing we need to think about again. I think that being agile, the ability to, change and experiment quickly and learn fast is really even more important now than it was. And so that's where I think we're at.
I think process, Sean, I think you're right. Like, what is a process? Ultimately, in an enterprise, it's communication between department to another department, right? I'm in sales. I put together a pipeline report. I look at my opportunities that are going to close that are higher than 90% probability. That report then gets sent to operations for them to staff up on delivery. Well, guess what? I think in 2026 and beyond, you're going to start seeing, let's just call them departments. It's a loose word, in air quotes, departments, agentic departments that are going to be created that basically are the bridge between sales and operations and billing and legal, all the things that we are used to doing in most organizations. There's going to be a middle person or a middle thing or a middle agent that basically addresses some of those gaps in process. And I think that's really where the opportunity is, and that's where the data conversation really comes into play. Because you're right, you don't need a lot of data. What you do need is context around that data, and that's where the human element is absolutely essential.
That's an interesting example of sales because forecasting is something that salespeople are notoriously bad at. And it's because it requires a level of subjectivity, right? And usually they want to believe that the deal is going to go through a little bit more than the deal is really likely to go through. So there's a lot of noise, right? They have to pick up on these cues. They have to, infer what the customer is saying, or if the customer is telling them it's closing, there could be something happening in the background that they're not aware of, right? So it creates kind of a discrepancy. And I wonder if, just by way of example, but if AI can get better at recognizing the signs rather than relying on subjective interpretation of the signs in the sales process to reduce the delta between forecast and actuals.
I think if the AI is used to even do things like discovery and then pursuit plan definition around discovery to be able to create a standard view of an engagement, a pre-sales engagement across the entire enterprise, to be able to actually do a frame of reference and compare one to another to say, all right, this gets a 73 and this gets a 24 because these variables are not met. It gives you an immediate, I think, a leg up on potentially doing forecasting. And so again, what are we saying? We've taken the existing sales, pre-sales to sales and closing process, and we've created bridge agents that allow us to measure and apply appropriate rules to be able to kind of move it to the next level, right? And so you can use that analogy, I think, for any department inside of an enterprise.
Sure. Um, I want to take just a 3-minute detour before we get to predictions and talk about this MIT study that came out, the
Which
research
one?
paper. The 90% of pilots fail and don't show ROI.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, there seems to be some warring going on over what this report actually says and how valid it is. So maybe Scott, just kind of lay out the foundation of, what was this paper and in your view, what is it actually telling us?
Yeah, and I think I think there's a valid commentary on, the methodology and how what you can really read from it and all of that. But I think they were very fair in the way they actually wrote it, if in the details. I think the way to look at it is that agents, I'll use the agents as because that's kind of the conversation for this year anyway. Agents are easy to build. And so a lot of pilots got taken on, got started, and it's very exciting, this idea that I can automate my workflows and I can do all these things relatively easy and quickly. But what's hard is infrastructure. It's hard to get people that have the right skill sets and training. It's hard to create processes that can absorb this capacity. So, for instance, we saw examples of things like, oh, we created efficiency in this department. Let's say it was a call center, but I really am not picking on that. Um, okay, but now what are these people doing during that extra free time they have? Because if there's not more demand for their time, you just create a capacity without solving the problem. What are we going to do with that capacity? Things like that were happening too. So it's really driving everything from the business and not from the where can we put AI. I go into customers and they will say to me, where can we use AI? And I try to get them to say, what pain points do you have where no other solution makes sense? Can we re-envision your business? Can we think of the whole way you work differently? Maybe we solve a different problem. So rather than solving the problem of how do we take calls faster, how can we anticipate the customer's need and so they never even have to have the call? Like just think about the problems differently too. So I think part of it is just getting people used to that. But I do think that a big part of the problem has been the infrastructure not being there to support what they're trying to do. And they didn't know it. You have to experience that. And I think that's what 2025 really represented. And 2026 is going to look more like solving for that.
I think it also leaves out whole categories of how AI is being leveraged. And Mac, you could maybe speak to this, but
Yeah.
um, there's almost certainly going to be an ROI if you deploy AI in the right way in your contact center, right?
But there is, but the key is in the right way, in
Right.
all that, and with the right targets.
Exactly.
I think, as a service provider, we are acutely aware of ROI, because inevitably you sell something to somebody for $1, you want to sell them something else for another dollar. And you have to be able to again build upon the confidence that you've instilled in your ability to succeed. It's not a one and done. We're not real estate agents here. Buy this house. Hope you enjoy raising your family in it, and I'll see you in 20 years. Right? It's in fact a software service or solution that we're bringing to bear. So we certainly have looked at that study and actually looked at the underpinnings, and we've adjusted our process a little bit, but a large part of what we have been doing is already there, which is having defined measurable goals.
Mhm.
I guess one thing just to double click on 2025, we've also stopped saying AI can do everything.
Mm.
Maybe it can and eventually, but the reality of it is it has a certain sweet spot, and that sweet spot is powerful, and we don't have to do everything to be successful.
Right.
We much rather be 100% good at three things than 30% good at 10. And that type of impact that gets focused and again measurable for our clients, allows them to connect the dots and say, okay, well, now that we've got those things under our belt, what should we do next? And working our way through again to those business challenges. And I think Scott hit the nail on the head. Is there a way to redefine approaches that are opportunities now that AI is here, and we've done the integrations and some other things that make it easier to adopt.
Robbie, you used a term earlier, productive failure, and that's how I viewed this report. My takeaway from this report is awesome. A lot of people are getting in the game. They're getting off the starting line. They're piloting AI. It does seem that there are some challenges with how they're doing it. But I don't know. Do you take that as a positive sign that more people are starting to adopt?
Yeah, this report made headlines, right? Anywhere I went in the channel or anywhere in front of enterprises, they would always refer to this report. Hey, MIT said 95% of projects are failing. So definitely made good headlines. But I agree with you. I think, and I've had these conversations. People tried a lot of different things. So if you try 20 different projects and 19 fail and you get one sort of thing that's successful, it teaches you a lot. And I think a lot of people were just in experimentation mode this year. And I think also it taught lessons to people that, hey, let's stop chasing, call them AI moonshots, and let's and focus on the boring. I've said that twice now. Let's point to unsexy stuff like document triage or I don't know, some kind of a non-headliner sort of thing to basically be able to improve a process. So I feel like this is all goodness for 2026 and beyond.
Yeah, Scott, you've demonstrated to me in the past that an AI pilot can be a very inexpensive proposition.
Yeah,
And so if you've got, 10 pilots that are running and they cost you $30,000 a piece to get up and running, and only one of them successful, but it saves the company $3 million, that's a win,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. And I think the other thing again is AI is such a broad term, and most of what we're talking about here are specifically large language models. They're not other types of AI typically that we're talking about. So I don't know what it really looks like when you get into the weeds of the type of AI you're talking about and the type of problem you're trying to solve with that AI. As you start to slice and dice that down, I bet that you're going to find there are certain areas where that it's really successful.
Yeah.
But what we do know is, and this came out of that Google Dora report, is that AI tends to, in a developer environment anyway, for developers, software developers, tends to amplify. So if they're doing well, it tends to amplify their capabilities. If they're struggling with process, infrastructure, workflow, whatever, it tends to make those problems even worse.
Yeah.
So that's another piece of this too, is how well organized are you to begin with before you start these experiments? For instance, are you an organization that knows how to run experiments? Do you know how to create the right metrics for success, create a hypothesis, time box it, analyze what you did, look at your results? Do you have that capability? Or are you just kind of doing work and seeing where you go? Like all of these different factors go into that number.
Yeah. I'm not known to be an optimist, but I read that study and I didn't take it as a bad thing. I think it
No.
actually was an indication of progress. All right, guys, lightning round. We only have a few minutes left here. I'm going to go through and ask each one of you for predictions for 2026. And I'm going to start with you, Mac.
I think I think we're going to see continued industry consolidation. That there's a lot of choices out there in the marketplace, and there's probably not enough demand to keep everybody on the growth curves that they need. The other thing is, we talked about it earlier, we're going to see agentic really start to hit its stride and be a method where folks are thinking about attacking problems with agents or an army of agents, not just using AI to replace a workflow. And that's going to, uncork the next new set of opportunities going into 2027.
Awesome. Scott, how about you?
Um, First of all, I do think that if this year was the year of agents, that next year is going to be the year of the agentic infrastructure. I think we're going to start to see much more focus on how we do orchestration, how we measure, move from observability to actual evaluation. So from seeing to knowing. I think we're going to really have to look at the economics of this inference running 24/7. And the data quality crisis is going to have to be addressed. I think you're going to start to see that be dealt with. And then the last one is we're going to have to deal with the talent issue, developing strategic thinkers when AI has automated the work that we created. So I think that's really going to be right. And I think if you get all those right, you're going to find that you're doing really well and get out of that pilot purgatory.
Robbie, how about you?
I think we're going to see autonomous departments. I mentioned that earlier. I think you'll have call it an augmented billing department that is driven by agents and AI. It'll handle 30, 40, 80% of, the workflow. You will start seeing more and more on that, not just for billing, but HR and for, other sort of tasks that humans don't necessarily need to do or want to do. I think you're also going to start seeing, we're starting to see this already, is let's call it on-the-fly software. We can code things in an incredibly fast way that we could never do before. So let's say temporary business applications that solve like one-off challenges. I think you're going to start seeing more and more of that. I'm starting to do that myself. So if I'm doing it, I know there's people way smarter than me that are doing that inside of their businesses. And then finally, I'd say we started seeing this a little bit in 2025, small language models. A lot of talk earlier about large language models, but we barely talked about small language models that run locally, securely. So I don't have to rely more on the hyperscalers of the world. So platforms that I can manage and control and secure myself to be able to accomplish again those one-off use cases that otherwise I wouldn't want to touch, a year ago. So those would be the kind of the top three things on my top of my head.
And Robbie, the funny part about that, I agree completely, is that the large model companies are trying to go the other way. They're trying to make their generalized models be able to do those custom things. That's like Anthropic's Claude's skill set, the skill capability was directly at that, right? The idea of taking a general purpose model and giving it skills. And so it's going to be an interesting kind of tension between the benefits of small models and the large organizations realizing they have to combat that.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, gentlemen, time is up. I really appreciate your time and expertise. I'm going to hold you accountable to your predictions, and we're going to schedule this webinar for next year as well. So good luck to you all.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
and
Thanks
happy
so much for
holidays
joining
to
us. Appreciate
everyone.
it. Yep, you
Take
too.
care.
Take care. Bye.
Take care.